morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to acknowledge we are here today on Treaty 6 territory, and I'd like to acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I'm MLA Christina Gray, the Alberta NDP House Leader, and I'm honored to be joined today by our leader, Rachel Notley. We're in the final days of the legislature's spring session, and while we in the NDP official opposition have bills we would still like to introduce, there appears to be no further pieces of legislation coming from Danielle Smith and her UCP government. This is disappointing, as I can tell you the bills that we did see from the UCP have not served Albertans. This session, the UCP focused on very self-serving agenda. Danielle Smith and her caucus have only been focused on themselves, their power, and increasingly their entitlements. The UCP have spent this session giving themselves bigger gifts, awarding high-paying jobs and contracts to their friends and insiders, and trying to control everything, everywhere, all at once. Danielle Smith brought forward legislation that allows her and her cabinet to control how municipalities access and spend federal dollars. They brought forward legislation that decides what research universities and post-secondaries approve and fund in our province, and that allows the UCP to decide which councillors and mayors get to keep their jobs and what bylaws those municipal governments are allowed to pass. Other legislation allows the UCP to centralize control of local emergency response and cuts municipalities out of the process. This is all on top of the UCP opening the door to appointing an even bigger and more expansive cabinet and creating more top administrative jobs for Premier Smith's inner circle. They even placed one of their party insiders in what was supposed to be a nonpartisan, unbiased role of the legislature's ethics commissioner. Last fall, Danielle Smith focused on making sure that her team could receive larger and more expensive hockey tickets, which Albertans are reminded of every time they see Danielle Smith in an arena suite this playoff season. She also rammed through deeply unpopular ideas like a provincial police force and spent tax dollars trying to convince Albertans to let her be in charge of their pensions. Since this election, almost a year ago, Danielle Smith has been squarely focused on Danielle Smith and what entitlements she can get as Premier. She has not been focused on helping Albertans with their finances. She immediately abandoned her key election promise of a provincial income tax cut, and she's refused to address skyrocketing rents, as well as ensuring Albertans can stay in their homes. She has not successfully lowered costs, whether that's insurance, fuel, or utilities, and she has done nothing to make Albertans' lives more affordable. On top of all that, she has not been focused on ensuring Albertans can get a room in a hospital when they need it. Instead, sick Albertans are being treated in hallways and sent to motels. It's beyond ridiculous. Danielle Smith has not been focused on building that call for this Premier's attention. Focusing on healthcare, schools, and affordability should be Danielle Smith's priorities, not trying to take over the role of councillors, mayors, doctors, and university administrators. To tell you about what further attacks on democracy the UCP has been making, I would now like to invite Rachel Notley, the most successful progressive politician in Alberta in my lifetime, to the microphone.
Thank you so much, Christina. Fun introduction. So listen, just to talk a little bit more about this sort of democratic deficit that we are seeing unfold here in Alberta. You know, I've been in this legislature back there since 2008. And seeing what happened under Toryland, I know two things. One, I know when a government thinks it is utterly entitled without question. And you can see it in their agenda. It's when it's all about them and not about Albertans. And I see that agenda today. And two, I know when we are seeing a government that doesn't care about the citizens they are there to serve. And they do that by attacking the democratic rights of those citizens. I see those attacks right now. I'm sad to admit that this UCP government has backslid into the old habits of the PCs that Danielle Smith used to criticize. She's using this legislature to consolidate power in her office. It's her way or the highway, as Christina just pointed out. But it's also about attacking one of the basic and most fundamental of rights and elements of democracy, which is about how business is actually conducted in that building behind us. You know, the PCs that Albertans got sick and tired of in 2015, they did the sort of thing we're seeing here today. They'd bring in some time allocation and closure, otherwise known as, to ensure that Albertans don't get a voice to debate their bills. But never have I seen such a coordinated attack on democracy as we are seeing today under Danielle Smith. In fact, the average amount of time for debate under our previous NDP government and the last iteration of the UCP has dropped by 1/2 under Danielle Smith. And she's used time allocation to reduce average debate time on bills this session, as I said, to 1/2 the normal course of business, which is actually very important to understand, as the UCP House Leader recently was published as accusing us, the opposition, as being obstructionists. Quite honestly, that is just a bold-faced lie, unless obstructionism under the UCP world now means showing up to work to stand up for your constituents. For regular Albertans, that means that legislation that dismantles and rips apart Alberta Health Services has so far received less than 2 hours of debate. It means that Smith's attempts to attack academic freedom of speech and independence of research in our post-secondary institutions has received less than 6 hours of debate. And on a bill that dozens and dozens and dozens of municipalities across the province have very clearly said is beyond any form of redemption, well, that's received less than 3 hours of debate. These aren't just our opinions on these bills. Communities and municipalities and stakeholders from across this province called on this government to hit the brake on their anti-democratic legislation. Since 2008, I've seen the PCs and now the UCP treat this institution as if it's their own little personal power playhouse. And I want to remind them, as we enter the final days of session, it is not theirs. This building, it belongs to all Albertans. They are elected by the people to serve the people, not themselves, and certainly not their friends and insiders. So they need to stop treating elected office as their own personal source of entitlement. We can have fulsome debates on the policies that will best shape this province. In fact, that's our job. And we can do this, and we must do this, mindful of what's actually in Albertans' best interest, not in the interest of the UCP cabinet and this power-hungry premier. So thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions folks here might have.
We'll start with any questions in person. State your name and outlet at the top.
Hi, Sean Amato, City News. I wanted to ask you about Bill 20. Is there anything in that legislation that the NDP likes?
You know, what I have to say about the legislation is that the overriding element of it is so flawed that there's no value to talking about other elements of it that might work. It gives to the premier the unfettered ability to rewrite bylaws. So who cares if it gives them permission to do certain creative things in other bylaws, because all of that can be overridden by the premier deciding to just undo a bylaw for whatever reason she sees fit. Moreover, it also gives them the ability to basically discipline councillors who speak out against them. By giving them an unfettered ability to force that councillor to suddenly be in a position of facing a recall vote. So because of that, it colors the whole bill, and there is nothing in it that can be fixed. And for that reason, there's nothing in it that we could defend.
AB Muni's is not giving up the fight. In fact, they're buying billboards. Yesterday, Minister McIver said that he's okay if they're less unhappy. What do you make of that standard that he set for consultation on this bill?
Well, I would say that it is a very low standard, but also it's not a standard they've met. This idea that these amendments have somehow made people less unhappy is part of the dishonest debate that the UCP is promoting by reducing the opportunity for people to engage in the debate. The reality is the amendments that they're putting forward, for which we will have about an hour to debate, do absolutely nothing to change the fundamental flaws embedded in this bill. And they're shutting down debate so that they can pretend they've done something different, but they haven't.
Hi, Lisa Johnson, Canadian Press. I'm not sure if Christina or Rachel, you want to take this, but Christina, last night you were talking about how this use of time allocation by the UCP, this is not what time allocation was meant for. Can you explain to people who don't understand parliamentary procedure what time allocation was meant for, and how is it being used in this sitting?
Absolutely. So time allocation is a tool that exists in the standing orders, but it has been used cautiously and respectfully throughout most of the legislatures. Just as an example, under the NDP government, it was used on a single bill in our term in government, but we didn't bring it in until after 17 hours of debate had already taken place. We have 38 members of caucus, official oppositions elected by Albertans to represent them in the House. When the government uses time allocation on a single hour, that gives 38 official opposition members a minute and a half each to say what they think about that piece of legislation. When we're talking about a bill like Bill 20, it's got like 20 separate statutes in it. It's got a huge number of changes. It's just a ridiculous standard. We also know that under the NDP government, time allocation was used 4 times across 4 years. The government is about to use time allocation 10 times across 4 days. The ratio of use is ridiculous. The final thing I had the chance to say in the legislature last night, and perhaps I'll get another chance to say, is across Bill 18, which impacts municipal funding, across Bill 20, which impacts municipalities, 21, which impacts emergency response, the government continues to say that the powers they are giving themselves will be used respectfully and with discretion. And yet here we see they have the powers in the standing orders that should be used respectfully and with discretion, and they are just going all over and completely overusing it in a way that wasn't intended and that Albertans do not support. I think when it comes to this UCP government, we should believe someone when they show you who they are. And this is a government that will take power and will overuse it, and we see that in the debate that's happening in the legislature.
Thanks, yeah, and so just kind of a hypothetical question. If this becomes the new normal in the legislature, that bills are debated for 1 hour at each stage, what does that mean for democracy generally? What does that mean to the average Albertan?
So there is no legislature or parliament across the Commonwealth where you see that little amount of debate. Even in places that have a different way of doing things, and perhaps there are more time restrictions placed, then the opposition has the ability to choose to spend more time on those things of key import. So it would put the Alberta legislature completely out of step with the rest of the Commonwealth. It would distort the intention of our parliamentary democracy. This is not how the legislature is supposed to run, and that was fundamentally what I was trying to communicate in my 5-minute response to time allocation last night, because we have a lot of new members of the UCP, of the NDP, and we need to talk about how broken this is and how this is not normal. We used to see on bills of key importance 25, 30, 40 hours of debate. And here we have bills of key importance that municipalities are taking out billboards to oppose, and it is only getting 3 hours. This is entitlement to the nth degree from a UCP government that is abusing the power that they were granted in the election to do things that they didn't even run on in the election. It is shameful, and we will continue to object to the railroading of democracy that we see in the legislature.
Hi, Janet French from the CBC. Questions for Rachel. The powers that be here tell us that today is your last news conference as leader of the NDP that's planned.
Tomorrow.
Oh, okay. The powers were wrong. Nevertheless, how do you feel?
I mean, obviously, I'm disappointed to be leaving a building where I've spent so much time in practically every role possible. Haven't really cleaned the bathrooms yet, but you still have time, so we'll see. But to be leaving it in such a horrifically anti-democratic state. This is a beautiful building. It is the symbol of what's best of us here in this province. It's a place where we come together, I hope, to bring together some of our best ideas, even if disparate. That's what makes us strong, is our diversity. And to see it exploited and abused the way we are seeing right now under this UCP government that actually ran on a pretense of respecting the grassroots is kind of sad. That's a bit where I am right now, you know, but yeah, tomorrow will be my last day as a leader in the legislature.
I'll ask you again tomorrow. Okay. Can you describe for me how you're planning to approach, like, you've still got a month left in your leadership while the race goes on to replace you. How do you plan to approach your leadership role during that time?
Approach which?
Your role as leader. You're still technically the leader during that time.
Well, you know, I think that as we get closer to the voting day and the campaigning gets more intense, that likely my role will take on a lesser and lesser importance as people focus on the election of a new leader. And you know, it's very exciting for our party, I have to say. You know, we have, as you know, over 85,000 people who've signed up as members. They're not new people. They're folks we've always known about, who we've talked to, who have supported us, who have donated to us, but we haven't systematically asked them to be members. And now they are. And so it's very exciting, and I'm very optimistic about the future of our movement and the future of our caucus, and ultimately, through our success, the future of the province.
I think this will be a question for Christina on procedure, of course. So in the past you've used, you know, hoist amendments and referral amendments. It seems like this time around you're going with the reasoned amendments. And I'm wondering...
You are such a geek.
I'm wondering, is that just because you think there's no hope of redemption, or why the reasoned amendments?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So yes, we have chosen to move what gets called RA1 on each of the bills. It allows our members to talk about what a better consultation process could have been. Talk about the fact that these bills shouldn't be proceeding in the way that they're moving forward. Whether we're talking about the impact to federal funding, that impacts. We've talked a lot about universities, but it also impacts municipalities, agriculture groups, nonprofits across the province. Like, it's the challenge with time allocation is it doesn't give the official opposition or even stakeholders enough time to talk about all the challenges and problems that exist in the legislation. There are major issues with Bill 20, I would say, because it changes so many different facets. And yet, we're being forced to really just hit the high notes and to try to repeat and echo what we're hearing from major stakeholders and bring that into the debate. Normally, we would be able to go section by section and talk about these. So the reasoned amendments, the amendments we're putting forward, is intended to just give us a vehicle to talk about how frustrating this has been and how it shouldn't be happening this way. And you'll continue to see us try to amend these bills when we get to Committee of the Whole. We do have amendments on each of these pieces of legislation. Likely what will end up happening is we will not have enough time to introduce even the amendments, even debate the ideas for change that we are getting from stakeholders. And probably we will end up having to table them at a subsequent day because we're going to get cut off for time. And that's just what's going to happen.
And you did touch on this, and it may be kind of obvious, but why is it important to allow time for every single member to be able to speak to a bill? Why is it important to allow time for debate over a few days so stakeholders can get back to you? Why is that so important?
It is critically important that there be adequate time to allow for members of the public, impacted stakeholder groups, Albertans to understand the changes that their government is trying to make. And it's important that official opposition members, all 38, in fact all 87 members of the legislature, have adequate time to be able to say, I received this email from a constituent, or I read this bill and I have a question about this particular section because of my critic portfolio or because of my writing. We are elected, and tomorrow is a year since that election, by Albertans to represent their views, to ask questions, and in the case of the official opposition, to hold the government accountable. And on Bill 21, only 21% of the official opposition even had the chance to speak to the bill before they started time allocating it. 8 members out of 38. The measure of allowing people to speak to it, I believe even goes back to the very first time time allocation was used. The first time time allocation was used in Alberta's history. Please forgive me if I'm not entirely accurate, but it was used to time allocate for 6 days, to give time for all members of the official opposition to be able to speak to the bill, but to cut it off and to say we've had a lot of debate, we're going to make sure everyone gets in, and then we're going to stop there. The idea of doing time allocation after a single hour is a complete distortion of that rule within the standing orders and how this process is supposed to work, especially given the huge amount of concern that we're hearing from stakeholders, from Albertans. They're completely changing how healthcare works. Like, it's huge. And so the official opposition, we're going to use every second we can. We will talk about what's happening in the legislature, and when the legislature rises, we will be talking to our constituents and their constituents about the entitlement that we've seen from this government.
All right, we have room for 2 more sets of questions.
Michelle Belfontaine, CBC. I guess the problem is, and you probably have seen this, the problem is that a lot of people don't follow this very closely, like we do, right? And of course, you're part of it. How do you make people care about this?
I can start. Well, I think, I mean, I made the joke with Catherine. I mean, it is true that the minutiae of these things aren't necessarily followed moment by moment. But I would argue that what we're dealing with now is a qualitative change. It is a change in a whole range of rights and experiences that Albertans have. They're going to go to the hospital with a mental health challenge for their aging parent and discover they have to navigate 3 separate organizations to get health care. That's a real thing. And we'll discover that the legislation that permits that was debated for 3 hours. And then they will go back to their home community and discover that the members of their council, who they elected, literally fear repercussion from the provincial government that has just given itself the authority to discipline councillors. And they're going to hear about that in their coffee shops. So the subsequent appreciation for the fact that all of this happened in 1/3, 1/4, 1/10 of the time within which it would normally happen is a story that it's our job to tell, and we're going to be telling it now, and we're going to keep telling it over the next 3 years to the next election. But the consequences people will feel, and the more they feel the consequences, the more they will probably care about the fact that it was jammed through in a way that has made Alberta probably the least democratic jurisdiction in the Commonwealth.
Are you expecting things to wrap up tonight? I mean, they've already got like 4 time allocation motions on the order paper.
So my understanding in this situation is that we will be back tomorrow. There will be another question period. We will wrap up tomorrow afternoon. That being said, the official opposition is in the position, with the government using heavy use of time allocation, that the government has the ability to drive the schedule. So that's currently my understanding is tomorrow afternoon. Do they have the power to shut things down tonight? I think they might be able to do that. But I hope that they will not shorten even the meager amount of time that we've had to make it even less. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the official opposition, we have a lot to say. Yes, to be incredibly clear, it is not the official opposition that is trying to run away from debate and accountability. We want to debate amendments. We want to bring in new pieces of legislation. We have a number of private members' bills that we haven't had the opportunity to introduce. Should we continue to sit into next week, I can tell you with 100% certainty that all members of my caucus will be delighted to be able to continue the debate on these key pieces of legislation, given 2/3 of my caucus hasn't even had a chance to speak to some of the bills. So yes, we would. That doesn't appear to be the direction that the government is taking us at this point, with the heavy-handed use of time allocation and their feelings of entitlement that they should be able to pass any legislation they want on any time frame they want, regardless of the fact that they didn't run on it in the election, and Albertans have not asked for this.
And we'll just go to the phones. Just a reminder for those on Zoom to use the raise hand function, and for those on the phone to use *9. Our first question online comes from Mark Villani from CTV Calgary. Go ahead, Mark. Your line is open.
For Rachel Notley. I just wanted to ask about the situation going on at Current Belcher Care Facility in Calgary, where adults with complex mental health issues have been placed into that facility, putting others at risk. We're hearing about some very dangerous issues going on there, with some patients being choked and staff locking themselves indoors. Just wanted to get your sense of what the province should be doing about this, and how long has the province known about this and not taken action?
Well, this arrangement was initially set up as a pilot project, I believe, roughly 3 years ago. But what we do know ourselves is that our critics for both seniors care and I believe also mental health care were reaching out to the government last fall, asking them what was going on here, and whether there was a review of it, and whether this was going to come to an end, because we had been contacted by desperately concerned family members as well as residents in that facility. So it's been going on for a long time. And so we've got a government that essentially, just as with the motel medicine crisis, we've since discovered that people had been reaching out and telling them that this was a problem back in January. But until it received the daylight of public transparency, they couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. And this is more of the same. So we worry a great deal about the health of those patients who need complex mental health care. They definitely need a high level of care and attention and time and treatment. And the folks who are in that continuing care setting, the seniors and the veterans, they need a place where they can live their life and feel safe. And quite honestly, Danielle Smith's idea that the way to fix this is to actually reduce the communication between people who do mental health and people who do continuing care, and build even more silos between them, when we've got evidence of the ministers not being able to work out the problems between each other already. That's not a solution. It's a distraction. It is an abandonment of her responsibility to care about the safety and the health care of these vulnerable citizens.
You have a follow-up, Mark? Any follow-up, Mark?
I think that was.
That's good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. We have time for one more set of questions.
Hi, sorry, I have another nerdy procedural question. Last night, I understand that, so the 15-minute division bells.
Yes.
Everybody can agree to pass a motion to make them 1 minute, so we don't have to sit through 15 minutes before a vote is counted. Why did the NDP not want to agree to 1 minute division bells? What was the reason behind that?
So last night, there were two moments. As we were getting prepared to go in to the legislature, the government tried to suggested 1 minute bells, But in order to make it easier for their members to not have to stay as long. And so we said no in planning, and we went into the House for that evening. We had a plan, we knew what we were doing. During some of the divisions, we did get a chance to watch a little bit of the third period of the hockey game, so that wasn't so bad. And then in the middle of the legislature last night, they sought unanimous consent for 1-minute bells, having not come to talk to me as the House Leader that they were going to propose that motion or to negotiate in any way. The government does not appear to understand the negative impact that 10 time allocation motions and limiting debate on 4 bills to a single hour per stage is having on the official opposition and our ability to do our job. And so when they surprised me with a seeking of unanimous consent, I said no. I think the government should come and have conversations with the official opposition if they are looking for agreement of all members to be able to do something and to facilitate the agenda that they are pushing through in the legislature right now.
Something that the government House Leader said yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, is that you have the largest opposition. Like when Jason Kenney was Premier, there was like a Wednesday that went 72 hours. I'm wondering, how do you think having such a large opposition may play into the time that they want to debate? Or does it?
Into how lazy their caucus is.
Yeah, so the challenge that we have seems to be that although we have elected 38 members as opposed to the 24 that there used to be, this government is not respecting the fact that the official opposition and our members have the right and should be allowed the time to discuss and debate the legislation in front of us. The fact that we have seen an average of 3 hours per bill in this session. No bill has been debated longer than 10 hours, which, to be clear, up until the last couple of sessions, there was always bills that went longer than 10, 15, 20. The bill that you referenced just now went and was debated for 44 hours under Premier Jason Kenney. That was the norm. And so what we're experiencing right now is incredibly different and is really doing a disservice to Albertans and the Albertans who elected us to be here.
No, and I think the other thing here that you should be asking them is you know, well, 2 things. First of all, the percentage of opposition MLAs in the House is a reflection of the choices of Albertans. So it is what Albertans want to see in terms of the level of oversight and questioning and double checking that they wanted this government to have. That is that breakdown of the number of members is a reflection of the choices of the citizens of Alberta. But the other part of it is that means that things will take a little bit longer. But it seems as though many of their members find that inconvenient, and they don't like to be there as long. And so that's the other thing that is driving a lot of this.
And that's the time we have for today. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, good job.